Hey ladies, Scott Horton here. If you would like truly youthful, healthy, and healthy-looking skin, there is one very special company you need to visit, Dagny & Lane at dagnyandlane.com. Dagny & Lane has revolutionized the industry with a full line of products made from organic and all-natural ingredients that penetrate deeply with nutrient-rich ionic minerals and antioxidants for healthy and beautiful skin. That's Dagny & Lane at dagnyandlane.com. And for a limited time, add promo code SCOTT15 at checkout for a 15% discount. All right, y'all. So now we turn to IPSnews.net. Of course, Gareth Porter has his great one destroying the ridiculous myth that Hezbollah did the Bulgarian bombing last summer. But also we've got Adam Morrow here and his co-author Khaled Musa al-Amrani. Political violence grips Egypt from all sides. Welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
I'm good, Scott. Thanks.
I appreciate you joining us today. So, catch us up to date. There's a bunch of different factions. What are the names and what are they fighting about?
Sure. Well, I mean, very broadly speaking, you've basically got the presidency, which is backed up by the Muslim Brotherhood and some other Islamist parties, versus a largely secular opposition, which is made up mostly of socialists, liberals, basically all non-Islamist factions.
Mm-hmm. And so the Salafists are with the government, on the government side then?
Interestingly, yes, the Salafists are definitely Islamists. They're ultra-conservative. But interestingly, the Salafist movement has kind of splintered over this because you have one group of Salafists who are supporting the presidency, and then you've got the largest Salafist party, which is the Noor Party, which is actually sort of, I wouldn't say allying itself with the opposition, but is at least entering into these initiatives, has just recently proposed an initiative to solve the political impasse. And this initiative has been created in conjunction with the leading opposition force, which is the National Salvation Front. So you actually have some Salafists who are not on the side of the opposition, but certainly cooperating with the opposition and discussing demands. And then you've got Salafists who are completely with the presidency and who accuse the opposition of putting its interests before those of the country. Mm-hmm. So the Salafist rank and file is definitely split. But then again, the Salafists are sort of notorious for their lack of cohesion in there are many different diverse groups following different preachers, as opposed to the Muslim Brotherhood, which has always been this very monolithic organization.
Mm-hmm. And now, the National Salvation Front, what are their demands?
What are their demands? Okay, bear in mind these are people. The National Salvation Front is headed up by Mohamed ElBaradei, who most Western audiences have heard of because he's the former he was the former UN Atomic Energy Agency chief. Mm-hmm. And along with two presidential candidates that lost to Morsi in last summer's election, those being Amr Moussa and Hamdin Sabahi. So those three, this sort of triumvirate, are the ones who are leading the National Salvation Front. So you basically have a situation where a group of unelected people are sort of issuing demands to an elected president, which is interesting in and of itself. What are those demands? They include a new government. They want to get rid of the current government of Prime Minister Hisham Handil, which was appointed by Mohamed Morsi. They want that replaced with a government of national unity, which is more representative of the opposition, I guess. They also want a serious modification of the recently approved constitution, Egypt's new constitution, which was approved by 65% of the voting public in a December referendum. So they'd like to see that subject to a raft of amendments. What are some of their? They want there's a prosecutor general that Morsi appointed sort of unilaterally in November, and they would like to see him removed as well. Those are their three chief demands. They've got several others. Some would say that they're actually, their critics would say that they're actually aiming to unseat Morsi. Their official statements, according to their official statements, all they want is these demands met. These very, and these are quite serious, major demands. They want the government to be changed. But like I said, some of their critics say that these aren't, this is all just sort of cover, and that they're actually working to actually see Morsi step down.
Mm-hmm. Do you believe that?
Yeah, I do. I think that is their end goal. I think they sort of tasted blood. I think after the massive turnout that they managed to pull, if you remember, in November and then again on the second anniversary of the January 25th revolution, and that was just a couple of weeks ago, they did manage to get tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of people onto the streets in different governorates, and they did manage to spearhead this enormous protest march on the presidential palace that, of course, ended violently, as they always do. So I think that when they saw that they were able to mobilize that kind of street support, I think they sort of tasted blood, and I think it's certainly in the minds of many people who just can't get over the fact, that still can't accept the fact that Egypt has an Islamist president. And I think that their best case scenario is, even if unstated, is to see early elections, snap presidential elections, some kind of new election, and maybe the election of a new president. Mm-hmm. Although, like I said, that particular demand remains unstated.
Right. Well, and you've told us before, though, that, there's no surprise whatsoever that Morsi won, that the Muslim Brotherhood has a support. If not, the vast majority of the people of Egypt actually supporting the Muslim Brotherhood, they were certainly the most organized opposition, the biggest single.
They were the ones on the ground. They were the ones on the ground, ready to hit the ground running when the revolution happened, because they had spent decades of sort of preparing the ground for it. That's true. The big surprise wasn't so much that Morsi won, that the Muslim Brotherhood candidate won, as it was how well the runner-up did, which was Ahmed Shafiq, if you remember, who was Mubarak's last prime minister. That he did as well as he did in the elections which were ruled fair and transparent by international monitors and that sort of thing. But according to the election results, Morsi took 13 million votes to Shafiq's 12 million, roughly, give or take a couple 100,000. But, I mean, that's how close it was. So that was actually the big surprise of the presidential election, is that the anti-revolutionary forces could actually, were actually much more of the public than people thought. That the country was almost close to being split between an Islamist rulership and a Mubarak-style, leadership.
And meanwhile, Mohamed ElBaradei and the liberals came in dead last, right?
Yeah, they just don't have any support.
He was always debunking the War Party's lies against Iran back when he was the head of the IAEA, and I hate the new guy, so I kind of have a soft spot for ElBaradei, but apparently the people of Egypt don't.
Yeah, he never flew over here. He returned to Egypt before the revolution amongst much fanfare. I think it was 2010, and several thousand people turned out at the airport to greet him because he was pushing the constitutional reform issue back then. His big thing was constitutional reform. But he never took off. He's backed by a bunch of, sort of westernized liberal types here. But in terms of mass grassroots support, he just never got it. He tried a couple times. He made several forays into local villages and that sort of thing to try to boost his popular credentials. But if you see footage of the guy, actually, whenever he's among the public, he looks absolutely petrified. And he's sort of been written off at this point because he's just too out of step with the average Egyptian, which is, as we've seen according to election results, is pro-Islamist, and he is quite liberal, and he spent much of his career abroad. I think it was in Vienna. So he is actually perceived as a foreigner by much of the Egyptian public. Sort of see him as a more Western than Egyptian at this point. So the guy really does, and he didn't even run in the presidential elections because I don't think he really would have gotten anything. So he's much less of a force to be reckoned with than possibly the other two members of the triumvirate, which are the two presidential candidates, both of whom did quite well, both of whom got several million votes in the first round, those being Amr Moussa and Hamdin Sabahi, who was a Nasserist.
Mm-hmm. Well, but still, a couple of million votes versus 12 million for Morsi, right?
That's true. Yeah, I mean, whatever his critics say, I mean, you just can't get around the fact that he does have democratic legitimacy in that he did win, he won a presidential election fairly and squarely.
Yeah, well, I mean, that doesn't make him legit to me, but I can see how, in Egypt it does. It sounds like he's got consent of the governed for now anyway. Although, like you're talking about, some of these protests and violent turning protests have been absolutely huge. I wonder, do you think that they really threaten his regime?
At first I did, but to be honest with you, after a couple of weeks of it, it now looks like they've sort of hurt themselves. And that was sort of the point of the article that I just wrote, in that these massive demonstrations and marches that they're calling for almost inevitably are leading to clashes with security personnel and stuff like that at this point. They're almost inevitably leading to violence. You have a lot of protesters who are engaging in these so-called campaigns of civil disobedience where they're blocking public transportation, they're blocking traffic, they're attacking state institutions, and this is actually alienating them from much of the public. I mean, all but the hardest core revolutionary, anybody but the hardest core revolutionary is going to resent that. And what we've actually seen in the last couple of weeks, actually, the last couple of big demonstrations, is I've actually heard reports of people on the street attacking protesters. You've got guys sitting in traffic who need to get to work. And I'm talking about millions of people in the greater Cairo area now, and they can't get to work because you've got this small core of very hardcore activists who are out there, like I said, blocking traffic and doing this other stuff, blocking the metro line and this sort of stuff. So I'm actually hearing stories now where just the public is sort of rising up against these self-proclaimed activists and getting into fistfights and attacking them and that sort of thing. So I think, in a sense, and I think these things, far from threatening the new Morsi government, I think they've actually lost in terms of credibility on the street because of some of their recent protests.
Yeah, exactly. I can see it now, like the International Answer Coalition on the eve of the Iraq War taking up the whole protest, talking about free Mumia. And everybody else just wants to wring their neck. Who cares about Mumia, But This is the exact kind of thing that you're talking about. Come on, guys, direct action. We feel good about ourselves being leftist activists, and all they're doing is screwing up their own agenda.
Exactly, and screwing up other people's everyday lives, So, yeah, there's definitely that sort of dynamic going on. The idea is that the time, there was a time for mass protests to unseat the dictator Hosni Mubarak, and there was 18 days of that. But now, 2 years later, we're well beyond that point, and people really need to be focusing on the electoral game, the political game at this point. You've got parliamentary elections that are supposed to be held within the next, 2 or 3 months, and a lot of people, a lot of critics of the opposition are saying, why are you spending all of your time with this, very sort of this, unproductive street protests and all of this, and civil disobedience and all of this other stuff, when you should be focusing on your upcoming electoral campaigns, and you should be trying to win over the public and and trying to explain your position in advance of parliamentary polls.
Now I know you got to go, but let me ask you real quick. I think you told me before that there's, reason to sort of sympathize with their point of view, that the way the Constitution is written, that, there's no point in participating because they've already been frozen out from the get-go, and that's why they're so damn mad in the first place.
Sure, that would definitely be their argument, although the opposite side, and again, it's very difficult to sort of get to the truth behind what's going on because you do have two different narratives that emerge, and it's very hard to figure out which one is the right one. But the Islamists would argue that that the liberals and leftists and all of those people were given every opportunity to participate in the Constitution drafting process, and it was only because they all of their demands weren't being taken into consideration that they staged two big mass walkouts from the Constituent Assembly, which had been tasked with drafting the new Constitution, and that it was that they had been given a valid chance, they had been given a fair chance to give their input and to sort of negotiate with other factions and arrive at a mutually acceptable Constitution, and that they forfeited that and just sort of tried to impose what they call a dictatorship of the minority. And when they didn't have all of their requests met, they just sort of walked out in mass. And a lot of people at the time thought that would end the Constitution drafting process and that the Assembly wouldn't be able to function. But instead, the Islamists were sort of like, well, okay, if you want to play that game, then we're just going to go through with it anyway. We'll just approve it anyway, and we'll hold the referendum anyway. And the people did give it. 65% of voters did back it in the end. So, like I said in previous interviews, it looks like I was wondering whether sort of how they would deal with this, and it looks like they're just powering through. They're sort of letting these more rambunctious elements have their demonstrations and their marches and that sort of thing. And they're going to let them do that with sort of the understanding and the foresight that all the opposition is really doing, like I said earlier, is sort of alienating the public. And so far, if you look back, they did get, despite the incredible opposition, they did get their referendum. Despite judges were saying they were going to boycott the referendum and they weren't going to provide any judicial oversight, and but they still got it. They still got their referendum. They still got the result that they wanted with a 65% approval rating. And it looks like they're going to get parliamentary elections in the next couple of months. So they're just sort of, like I said, they're just sort of powering through. and allowing the electoral process to take its course despite all of these these repeated interruptions. And I should add also that these strikes and protests and demonstrations and marches and all of this stuff are also really starting to impact the economy negatively. So that's also badly affected their credibility. You've got tourism is declining badly, is steadily declining because of all of the political instability, and you've got investors are getting spooked from the stock market. So the stock market is ending down whenever you've got bouts of, spates of political violence or whatever. Yeah. So people are really becoming very turned off by the whole thing.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. And now, I know you heard Phil Giraldi say that he has CIA sources telling him that the Saudis are bankrolling troublemakers in the streets just to make everything worse in order to undermine Morsi, although it sounds like maybe, if anything, they're undermining Morsi's opposition. But what do you make of that?
Right, yeah, no, I remembered you mentioned that, and I actually sort of asked around about it if anybody had heard anything like that, and it was originally, I think he said Saudi and Qatar. Now, I don't think it's so realistic in the case of Qatar, which is quite pro-brother, with whom the Brotherhood has a very good relationship, at least publicly.
Yeah, I'm not sure
it makes a lot more sense about Saudi, though. Saudi is definitely, they would have a reason to. They were very pro-Mubarak. They supported Mubarak until the end. They were very against his prosecution. So that is not so, that can't necessarily be ruled out. But that being said, I haven't heard any concrete, evidence of that.
And it doesn't sound like it's working regardless. It sounds like it's just blowing up in their face if that's what they're trying to do.
Exactly. It sounds like a dumb plan in the first place. It sounds like they thought they had more public support than they actually did. And it's just, it was just poor. They thought the whole country was sort of going to rise up at once and that they would get all these copycats would all join in and start attacking Muslim Brotherhood offices. And that didn't really happen. You do have a core of, tens of thousands, maybe even call them 100 or 200,000, people who are staunchly anti-Morsi, either from the left or from the pro-Shafi'i, right. But these have to be weighed against, the tens of millions of, the silent majority, the tens million strong silent majority in the countryside and elsewhere, all of whom are continuing to give President Morsi and his administration the benefit of the doubt.
Yep. All right, I'm sorry. I know you got to go. I've kept you way too long here. Thanks very much for your time, Adam, as always.
Hey, my pleasure, Scott. I look forward to doing it again.
Great. Yeah, it'll be soon. All right, everybody. That is Adam Morrow from Interpress Service. That's IPSnews.net reporting live from Cairo. As always, keeping us up to date on, now 2 years out from the revolution that toppled Hosni Mubarak. Hey, y'all, Scott here. First of all, thanks to the show's sponsors and donors who make it possible for me to do this. Secondly, I need more sponsors and more donors if the show is to continue. ScottHorton.org/donate has all the links to use PayPal, Give.org, Google Wallet, WePay.com, and even Bitcoins to make a donation in any amount. You can also sign up for monthly donations of small and medium-sized amounts through PayPal and Give.org. Again, that's ScottHorton.org/donate for all the links. To advertise on the site or the show, email me, Scott@ScottHorton.org. And thanks. The Emergency Committee for Israel, Brookings, Heritage, AIPAC, WINEP, JINSA, PNAC, CNAS, the AEI, FPI, CFR, and CSP. It sure does seem sometimes like the war party's got the foreign policy debate in D.C. all locked up. But not quite. Check out the Council for the National Interest at councilforthenationalinterest.org. They put America first, opposing our government's world empire, and especially their Middle Eastern madness. That's the Council for the National Interest at councilforthenationalinterest.org. Hey everybody, Scott Horton here, inviting you to check out the Future Freedom Foundation at FFF.org. They've got a brand new website with new and improved access to more than 20 years worth of essays promoting the cause of liberty. And FFF's writers, including Jacob Hornberger, Jim Bovard, Sheldon Richmond, Anthony Gregory, Wendy McElroy, and more, aren't just good. They're the best at opposing and discrediting our corrupt overlords in Washington and their warfare, welfare, regulatory police state. That's the Future Freedom Foundation's new and improved site at FFF.org. Man, you need some Liberty stickers for the back of your truck. At LibertyStickers.com, they've got great state hate, like Pearl Harbor was an inside job. The Democrats want your guns. U.S. Army, die for Israel. Police brutality, not just for black people anymore. And government school, why you and your kids are so stupid. Check out these and 1,000 other great ones at LibertyStickers.com. And of course, they'll take care of all your custom printing for your band or your business at TheBumperSticker.com. That's LibertyStickers.com. Everyone else's stickers suck. Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here, inviting you to check out wallstreetwindow.com. It's a financial blog written by former hedge fund manager Mike Swanson, who's investing in commodities, mining stocks, and European markets. Wall Street Window is unique in that Mike shows people what he's really investing in and updates you when he buys or sells in his main account. Mike thinks his positions are going to go up because of all the money the Federal Reserve is printing to finance the deficit. See what happens at wallstreetwindow.com. And Mike's got a great new book coming out, so also keep your eye on writer MichaelSwanson.com for more details.